Welcome to The Rest is Politics with me, Alastair Campbell.
And me, David Gauke.
Yes, indeed, it is David Gauke off the bench to replace Rory Stewart. And who could be better, given that Rory Stewart says you are his political hero? And for those who didn't listen last week, Rory is currently sitting cross-legged for 14 hours a day on an 11-day retreat.
Handcuffed to a radiator.
It might as well be for all we know.
I think it's a hostage prep.
Blissfully unaware that he won a major award for his book last night. He was made to, back to the hostage theme, he had to pre-record a video of acceptance without knowing whether he'd actually won or not. Well, we now know that he's won, but he doesn't. Anyway, David Gauke, we're going to be talking about UK politics in the first half, another Sunak reset, another blot on the Rwanda landscape as they struggle to get that through, and another defection from Tory to Labour. And then we're going to, in the second part, talk about the state of the world, Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, and we've both been following things in Georgia. And though this is not an episode of leading, I hope we will be able to touch a little bit on your career, David. MP from 2005 to 2019, 3 ministerial jobs in the Treasury, so maybe something good to say about the state of the economy, Work and Pension Secretary, Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary for Theresa May, and then the career coming something shuddering of a halt when you made it clear you wouldn't serve Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. So for that alone, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Alastair. No, great pleasure to be with you and to be the poor man's Rory Stewart for the week.
You weren't called upon to accept his book award last night.
I don't know. It didn't get to me. No message.
Never mind.
I feel I missed out.
So listen, where should we start with the state of your party? We've just done this rather remarkable interview with Kwasi Kwarteng on leading, which I know you've listened to. For those who haven't, the first half is out now to everybody. And the second part will be out on Monday. And if you can't wait, all you need to do if you want to go for it now is become a member of The Rest is Politics Plus. And you do that by going to therestispolitics.com. You sign up and you can hear Kwasi Part 2 straight away. I just wonder what you made of it, because I was very, very struck that if I was sitting in central office listening to that and I hear a serving MP say the sorts of things that he said about he kind of knew that Truss was a disaster, and also saying if he was in his 20s, he couldn't really find a reason to vote Tory. And yet there he is, having been the Chancellor at this sort of seminal moment, and now, albeit not standing at the election, is a serving MP. So what did you make of it?
Well, I did listen to both interviews. I thought they were fascinating. I thought what was most striking was that essentially Kwasi has gone from being a participant to a commentator. Now, that's a route that I can kind of understand, but generally you tend to do that, after you have left Parliament. Yes. So or at least left the party, which doesn't necessarily happen at the same time. So, he was very candid, very open about the failings of him and Liz Truss. To some extent, a bit glib about it, I thought, but it was a very candid interview. And as you say, he said, if I was 22, I probably wouldn't be voting Conservative. He was sort of late to the party to some extent. The context was he was talking about how in his early 20s he wasn't particularly party political. He was, but that is a real problem for the Conservative Party, how badly the Tories are doing with younger voters. And, some of the polling is pretty spectacular, how badly they're doing. And, he'd sort of slipped into the sort of reminiscences of a retired politician, almost forgetting he was still a Conservative MP. As I say, I don't know whether he was sort of auditioning to be the next substitute Rory Stewart, but I say hands off.
I think one older toad in here is enough. I really do. What about you then? How would you define yourself politically now?
So I would consider myself to still be a person of the centre-right, but I feel politically homeless. I've got a lot of friends still within the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and a lot of them I wish really well. I think the country has definitely reached a point where it feels it's time for a change. I've got a lot of respect for people like Rachel Reeves and Wes Streeting and so on. I don't think they'll let the country down, but I'm not a lateral Labour person. I'm still somewhat of the centre right. I'm still someone who is, perhaps sceptical about what the state can do. I'm not a sort of anti-state, libertarian, but I do think there are limits to what government can do. I essentially believe in a free market economy. I'm sort of naturally sceptical about sort of utopian ideas. I dislike the far left. That's very much not my politics. So I think I belong on the centre right, but I don't feel the Conservative Party really represents me. It's not as hostile, it's not as unattractive as it was under Boris Johnson. I do think Rishi Sunak is an improvement, but I do still think that the right is calling the tune, and I do fear that if we're looking forwards, that the Conservative Party may well move fairly significantly.
So what do you vote? What are you going to vote?
I don't know at the moment how I'm going to vote. I would say, look, if I was living in constituencies which were not crucial as to who was going to be in power next time round, but constituencies with good One Nation Conservative MPs or candidates, I would be voting for them. So if I was living in the, don't want to run an exhaustive list, but if I was living in the constituency of Alex Chalk or Greg Clark or Caroline Noakes, or where Rupert Harrison is a candidate, there's many others I could mention. I almost certainly would vote for them, mainly because I think Labour are going to win next time round.
You don't think there's any doubt about that?
I don't have any. No, I don't have any.
You and I did an event in your former constituency recently, and I think I was the only person in the room who was still making the case that it's not all over. Why are you so convinced that Labour are going to win? And do you think they're going to win with a majority?
Yeah, I think they're going to win with the majority. I mean, it's a point that even if they don't have a majority, no one will go into coalition with the Conservatives. But I think Labour will get a majority. I'd turn it round in a way, Alastair, is that why do you, despite all the polling evidence, why do you think that Labour are not heading towards a big majority?
That is a very good question. And I guess partly it's my kind of historical experience of having been in places where it looks like the results done deal, but then the result turns out to be different. But also I keep looking at the numbers and the swing. And even with those local elections, I look at them and think, okay, the Tories did very, very badly, but there was still 1 in 4 people who could be bothered to vote, still voting for them, despite everything. And of the 2/3 that didn't vote, at least a good 2/3 of them are probably going to come out. And if they weren't already motivated to vote against the Tories, maybe they can be won back. Now, I'm deliberately playing the pessimist because I've always done that. But I just worry as well that politics is so volatile. I think the Conservatives still have an incredibly biased media in their favour. We've seen that in the last couple of days. I mean, Rishi Sunak delivered this speech, which was billed as the sort of, the big speech that this is where the electoral battle lines were being drawn. And I read it, and it was like a not very well written Daily Telegraph column about the state of the world, interspersed with a few gratuitous attacks on Keir Starmer. It didn't seem to me to add up to anything at all.
Yeah, look, I think I can understand why Labour people who have had the experience of 1992 and 2015, when you were both expected to win,
and the last century, by the way. I mean, your lot have just been so good at winning.
Yes,
and
we have.
I think that's ingrained in people like me.
Yeah, but most of the time it's kind of expected that we were going to win. So everyone knew in 83 and 87 what the result was going to be. Look, I can understand the nervousness about it. And I do think there will be a bit of a narrowing, because I do think quite a lot of the don't knows really do look like Conservatives, and they'll break that way. And I suspect Reform will get squeezed a bit.
Do you think, by the way, that Reform, I mean, Farage just loves being talked about, but do you think Reform are no longer in a place where they can credibly do a deal with the Tories like they did the last time?
I don't think they can do a deal with the Tories. I think Reform can do a certain amount of damage to the Conservatives, because they clearly, more than UKIP, they take their votes off the Tories. So they certainly can do some damage. My worry is the Conservative Party gets so hung up about Reform and says, we're losing some votes to our right, ignoring the fact they're losing vastly more numbers, people like me, to the Liberal Democrats or to Labour and so on. I'm hearing rumours that Nigel Farage doesn't think that this is going to kind of work out, that he's not going to win a seat if he stands. So if he doesn't stand, I think that helps. And actually Reform's performance in elections tends to, whether by-elections or council elections, does tend to be a bit below what you'd expect if the the national opinion polling was right.
So do you think some of that reform vote could actually go to Labour? The current Labour?
I'm not so much. I think because I think Labour have already got those, if you like, the people who were voting UKIP, who were, if you like, Labour, UKIP, are now back at Labour, a lot of them.
Mm.
I think the people that Reform get is probably more damage, is more concentrated on the Tories than was the case with UKIP.
Now, you were Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice, so I've no doubt you followed the whole Rwanda debate with a lot of interest. First of all, could you have voted for the stuff that they've done in Rwanda? And what do you make of this judgment that's been made in Northern Ireland, where essentially they're saying that somebody who's crossed the channel on a small boat has made his way through the mainland, as it were, and has ended up in Northern Ireland, and that a judge there saying that he cannot be sent to Rwanda, which strikes me as yet another little legal hurdle that the government probably hadn't thought about.
Yeah, it's more difficulty for the government here, and this comes down to the Good Friday Agreement and the terms of that. And I know Rishi Sunak has been saying, but this is not what the Good Friday Agreement is. Well, sorry, this is all in legislation, and the judges get to decide these things. So look, on the Rwanda bill more broadly, I didn't like it for a couple of reasons. One is that when it comes to whether a country is safe or not, that seems to be a matter of fact that should be determined by the judiciary, not by Parliament. Secondly, I think in terms of value for money, this is a sort of terrible policy. And on the deterrent argument, it's only small numbers of people who go to Rwanda, so it doesn't meet the scale of the problem. Where I have perhaps a bit more sympathy for the government on this is, this is a problem in terms of the small boats coming across. I think if you found somewhere that was safe and said, well, okay, we're going to outsource the asylum system. I know a lot of people will say that's objectionable.
Other countries are looking at that as well.
Other countries are looking at that. I don't find that objectionable in principle. If you've got somewhere that is genuinely safe and a country says, look, rather than take asylum seekers ourselves, we will fund people getting asylum in another safe country that's prepared to take them. But that has to be a safe country, and that should be determined by the judiciary. And I particularly dislike, and if there was something that would completely put me off voting Conservative next time, is the discussion about coming out of the European Convention on Human Rights. I think that would be a ridiculous policy.
And Sunak presumably would agree with you on that, but feels he has to do it because of the Bradmans of this world.
Presumably. But again, coming back to the speech that he delivered, the sort of reset speech, is a very strong hint. If it's a choice between sticking by the conventions and protecting this country, I'll protect this country. And that's the way he's framing it. And he's almost sort of talking himself into a position. I just think the problems that arise for our international reputation, if we left the ECHR, we'd be with Russia and Belarus, the only countries not in it. You have got all sorts of issues with the Good Friday Agreement. And at a practical level, on this very issue about small boats and illegal immigration, it's very evident that we require cooperation with other countries, and there will be less cooperation if we're outside the ECHR, not more.
You called his speech a reset, and I think by my calculation, it's 7th or 8th sort of attempt to kind of project something very, very different. This is where I think this sort of rather slavish support of a lot of the media works to his disadvantage, because they sort of assume that their readers have no memory. They assume that we have no memory. And it struck me as being in complete contradiction to the image of himself he was projecting at his party conference, whereas he was Mr. Change. I'm going to be the change guy. And now essentially he's being Mr. Continuity. And I also thought, I have this theory that the public hate politicians when they have colds. He had a really bad cold. That's
not really his fault, to be fair.
It's not his fault, but, whenever Tony had a cold, I was let's just make this very, very brief. Instead of which he did the full thing, and it was quite a long speech. There's a very funny thing. If you go to the Downing Street website, I tried yesterday, because I'm a great believer in reading speeches rather than relying on the BBC or anybody else telling me what's being said. So I thought, I'll go to Conservative Central Office website. I mean, that website is so bad. The last news item was something about the budget, which I think was in March. It's basically about donate, 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 donate. I then thought I'll go to Policy Exchange, the dark money right-wing think tank that hosted this event. So they said, full text available here. I click on here, and it takes me to the number 10 website, where the speech says 9 times in the text, please note political content redacted here. So they've got the whole speech.
In a political speech.
In a political speech, apart from all the bits that are political, which were basically saying Keir Starmer's, the country wouldn't be safe. But I just find with Sunak, and he's out again today talking about food security, it strikes me that he's kind of confusing being busy, either with doing the job or actually with having a coherent strategy. And I just wonder, you kind of are closer to these people psychologically. What are they trying to do, and what is their thinking as we now head towards fairly soon a general election?
Well, look, first of all, I agree with you in terms of, even the speech itself had 2 big messages, one of which is, storm clouds are gathering. And on the other hand, it was, it's going to be a really exciting time with AI and technology. And there was a very good cartoon in the Times today that had Rishi Sunak as Chicken Little, and it's, the sky's going to fall in and the plan is working. So, if the plan is working, then, we should be doing something about the sky, I suppose. So I think that's a difficulty, a strategic message difficulty. And actually, there has been a long-standing problem not to settle on a line. And so the party conference position, and that, I was going to be the change, and we've had 30 years, which seemed to be a dig at David Cameron, amongst others, and then a month later, David Cameron's back in the cabinet. Good thing too, I would say, but that's not very consistent. And even in this speech, they're sort of scrabbling around for attack lines. They're trying this argument that Labour is a risk with national security. On that particular issue, it's not the public's priority, and the Conservatives have a small lead on it, on some polls at least, but it's tiny. But
I think on our poll, Labour were ahead on defence.
It's not much. It's better than a lot of other topics for the Conservatives, but it's pretty small. But it seems to me their whole argument, an awful lot of weight is essentially placed on we've promised to get to 2.5% of GDP defence spending by 2030, and Labour haven't matched that promise. But 2 points on that. One is the Conservatives actually haven't said how it's funded. So it's an unfunded spending commitment. They say it's about cutting civil service, but it really isn't. They haven't properly funded it. Secondly, look, this was an announcement they made on the 24th of April. So 3 weeks ago they said we should get to 2.5%, and now they're saying, well, Labour, they haven't said they get to 2.5%, for over the last 3 weeks either. It's a bit late in the day if that's your big divide. And look, sometimes, frankly, Labour on occasions have been really weak on national security. A party do still think it is appalling that a mainstream political party went into an election led by Jeremy Corbyn twice. And, in those circumstances, particularly after what happened in Salisbury and so on, I think, the Tories are perfectly entitled to give the Labour Party a kicking on national security. I just don't think it's going to resonate in the same way with Keir Starmer and John Healey and David Lammy in the same way.
I've been at quite a few military and defence establishment things recently, and there was one at which actually both government and opposition were present. And one of the guys who was there, he was ex-military but now working in the defence industry, basically said that, you look around the room, people are looking at John Healey and thinking, he's all right as a defence secretary. So I don't think it works with Keir Starmer. I think what they've been trying to do over the course of the Parliament has been this constant linking of Keir Starmer to Jeremy Corbyn, but I don't think it's worked because Keir Starmer has kicked him out of the party, and Keir Starmer does use the phrase the Change Labour Party almost as often as we used to say New Labour. And I think that has kind of got through. And of course, maybe we should talk a little bit about Natalie Elphicke, because this is the other big thing that's happened recently. And I think it's worth people knowing that, Rory and I talked about defections recently, and I talked about the defections that I was involved in, Alan Howarth and Sean Woodward and Robert Jackson and Quentin Davis. But here's a quiz question for you. How many from one main party to the other, how many defections have there been since the turn of the last century?
From both the main
Yeah,
party.
and one of them was at a time when the Liberals were the second other main party. So that's Churchill in 1904.
That turn of the century.
Right. You're going back to turn of the last century.
19th through the 20th.
So that was 1904.
Yeah.
This month. Since then, how many from one main party to the other defections have there been?
Directly, not with interim
not via
periods.
independence.
Yeah, I don't know, 12, 15, something like that.
Eight.
Right. And we've had two in the last couple of weeks.
We've had two in the last 3 weeks, and we've had three in this Parliament. I think there was a massive gap between Churchill and Reg Prentice in the 70s, who went from Labour to Tory. Then we had so they're relatively rare, and I think it's very interesting how. I guess I'd be interested in your take on whether you think Labour were right to take Natalie Elphicke, and whether you think the Tories have been right to launch what appears to be a pretty concerted campaign to try to discredit her.
Well, I can see why they took Natalie Elphicke. But I think it's a fascinating one. And I suspect that if she was not the Member of Parliament for Dover, they wouldn't have done. So it's a defensive move, I think, coming from Labour, that they are worried about the Rwanda small boats issue. And they think as part of their defence, if they can say, well, look, even the MP for Dover thinks that we're better on small boats than the Tories, then that's that is helping to neutralise, from their perspective, a potentially dangerous issue. I do think it is still causing Labour some embarrassment. I mean, I was very surprised if I was to come up with a list of Tory MPs who were going to flip over
you might
to
have
the
put
Labour Party.
Tobias Ellwood first.
Well, let's put it this way. I wouldn't have Natalie Elphicke in the top 150.
Give us a sense of who and what she is.
Right. So, and there are two issues with her, I think, in terms of this defection. So Natalie Elphicke was the wife of Charlie Elphicke. I don't know Natalie very well. I have met her, but I don't really know her well. But I was a colleague of Charlie's for 9 years. He was charged with sexual assault cases and essentially, stood down in 2019 as the MP for Dover. Rather surprisingly, Natalie, who was well known to be a Conservative Party activist, she was always very political, emerged as essentially the only candidate to be the Tory parliamentary candidate in Dover, and won the seat.
And also stood by him.
Including after he was convicted in 2020, and she made some comments, essentially critical of the victims, the people who'd given evidence against him,
allegedly.
And it was because he's being punished for being attractive and attracted to women and so on. So she stood by Charlie. Now, I find these issues a little bit difficult because you've clearly got personal loyalties and so on, and I don't want to rush to be too judgmental about that. But I can understand why quite a lot of Labour MPs are saying, really, for women victims of sexual assault, that was not great. And
the fact that, according to Robert Buckland, though he's kept quiet about it ever since he claims it happened, she tried to interfere in the case.
Yes,
presumably you, as a former Lord Chancellor, would have run a mile from.
Yeah, to be honest, I think I would have probably done as Robert did, which is to say, no way. So essentially, Natalie Elphicke went to Robert Buckland, who was the Lord Chancellor at the time, and said, can we, I think, wanting to change the judge in the case because this one's a toughie, which is, pretty outrageous. And Robert said, no, there's no way I'm going to do that.
But shouldn't he have done more than that? Shouldn't he have gone to the Standards Commissioner and said, excuse me, I've just been approached by an MP who's asked me to nobble a judge?
I think I can. I sort of thought about this. I think you would tell the Chief Whip, which I think he did. But it very much depends on the specific circumstances. But if she sort of went away and, oh, is that right? Oh, sorry, didn't understand. That's I'm dropping it. I mean, it clearly got nowhere. There was no nobbling of judges. Nothing ever happened. Would I then be inclined to sort of say, well, this was wrong, I've sorted it out, nothing has happened, there's been no nobbling of judges, I've told the chief whip, if the chief whip wants to do anything, that's up to him, but I've kind of done my duty. I can sort of understand how that would happen. Could I then, if I was Robert Bugland 4 years later, when Natalie Elphicke then defects, would I resist telling that story to the public? I'm not sure I would either. So
really?
I think, no,
really?
I'm not sure. Yeah,
so all is fair in politics?
I think in this case,
I could... we can just sort of
I don't think there was no nobbling of judges. She made an improper request. Nor, by the way, do I think, looking at it was a foolish error of judgment. She shouldn't have done it. But she went to a ministerial colleague, and a ministerial colleague said, no, this is going nowhere, forget it. And if it was forgotten, if that was the end of it, so be it. I don't think it's the sort of, I don't think it's, nor is it, by the way, I think devastating for her whether she can carry on as a Labour MP. There is a second aspect, though, which is that she's consistently been a very right-wing populist MP. She is not someone... Unlike, for example, Dan Poulter or Christian Wakeford, both of whom you could see were sort of closer to Labour on quite a few issues.
And in agony about what was happening inside their party.
Yeah. That's a different thing. I think there are some defections are more honourable than others and more understandable than others.
Can you see any others of your former colleagues? Because Labour keeps saying there are others in the pipeline, which is presumably may be true, but may also just be a destabilising.
Well, if in the sort of all fares in politics thing, if I was Labour, I would absolutely be saying this. In fact, I did an event with Wes Streeting last night, and I did, yes, yeah. He basically said I was too left wing to come over. So we don't want lefties. We just want these right wing populists. Yeah. I see. Personally, I'm sort of thrilled by this defection. If perhaps Labour could take another 100 or so populist right wingers and then leave the Tory party to the sensible grown ups, I'd be delighted. Carry on. I think others should follow the. It's a pity Lee Allison didn't go in the same direction.
It is interesting how the reaction inside the Labour Party has been very interesting.
I mean, are you comfortable with it?
Broadly, I am. I don't like her politics. Nobody would be surprised to know I've never been that close to Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott, but I think it sits a bit odd that they're not really considered to be Labour and suddenly Natalie Elphicke is. But I think the broader message that the Labour Party is saying, we did not get the support of a lot of people who may be considered to be right-wing, people like Natalie Elphicke, or voters who have voted for people like Natalie Elphicke. We have to get those people back. And so I think what Keir Starmer's... I can't imagine that Keir Starmer felt terribly comfortable, but I think there is a bigger political gain there, which is that once people, and I'm afraid this will happen quite quickly, once they forget Natalie Elphicke, what they will remember is the sense of Tory decay. And I think they'll also remember that the Keir Starmer's out there basically saying, we need people who didn't vote for us before to vote for us. So I think there'll be people who maybe feel a bit uncomfortable about Labour, who could possibly feel a bit more comfortable because of this defection. But I don't think it's a huge thing. I think it'll be forgotten much more quickly than some of the other defections.
Is there a line that you would draw? Are there Conservative MPs you would say, no, we're not having them? Or is the political prize... I agree with you, by the way, that most people, the takeaway most people have from this, when it all settles down in a few weeks' time, is another Tory has defected. But are there things that have been said or done by any Tory MPs that you would say, no, we can't touch you?
Look, I think before she defected, if you'd asked me for a list of people, I would have said, no, we don't want them. Mm-hmm. I think she might have been on it.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right. Basically, the prize was to have, while the Tories were trying to pretend or say that Labour couldn't be trusted on the issue of immigration, to have the MP for Dover saying, I back Labour's plan over Sunak's plan, I think is too big a prize to dismiss. But I would feel uncomfortable about some of those, Braverman. If Braverman was suddenly to say, if Truss was suddenly to say, I'm back in Labour, I would be looking for the sick bucket so fast, and I would then fill it and throw it at anybody who dared to get them over. But when we were in opposition, and when we were in government, I was kind of in charge of trying to get defectors, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it always is, because you know as well as anybody, morale is very, very important, particularly going to an election campaign. And I think the effect of morale, of knowing that you're losing people that you thought were kind of yours forever, I think must be pretty devastating. So I don't know, there'd be a few I wouldn't want, but I think by and large, I mean, Neil Kinnock said, even the broadest of church has walls. Yeah, true. But, you need to get new people.
So it's politics, really.
It is politics, and it's pretty brutal politics. And I suspect, look, I think the one thing about Keir Starmer that people maybe underestimate is I think he's pretty ruthless. And I think the ruthlessness may or may not extend in future to Natalie Elphicke possibly not being as big a deal in the future of our housing policy as you might think right now.
Or Baroness Elphicke.
Well, that is the other possibility, I guess, because they're going to have to, sadly, if they're going to be serious about reforming the House of Lords, they're going to have new peers to help them do it. So Baron Gauke is also a possibility.
I very much doubt it. Before we go to a break, Alastair, I just read an interesting piece by Tom McTague of Unheard. It was also republished in The Times, talking about Morgan McSweeney, who is Keir Starmer's right-hand man. And I think you know him pretty well. And Tom's piece is arguing that Morgan McSweeney, very much an anti-Corbynista, but also what he's not about is the restoration of Blairism. And there's a sort of distinction drawn between, if you like, a sort of Tony Blair vision for the Labour Party, which is Labour Party should be for the people who are kind of open to a modern world, fighting against the sort of populists who want to be closed off from those realities. And it should appeal to liberal graduate voters and so on. Whereas the sort of Morgan McSweeney vision, as portrayed by Tom McTague, is much more of, actually, the Labour Party is essentially a party for the working classes. It's got to appeal to those sort of leave voting working class voters. Maybe the sort of Natalie Elphicke thing plays into this to a large extent. And that's the direction that the Labour Party is going in. And it's sort of sees Tony Blair as being out of touch and so on. And now, look, you're obviously a very good friend of Tony Blair. Where do you sort of stand on this? Is that a fair categorisation of where Morgan McSweeney is coming from? Well,
I thought it was an interesting piece. If I were Morgan, who I think is a very smart guy and has done an amazing job for Keir Starmer, you rightly, I think, say he's his right-hand man, because he was the guy who essentially was alongside Keir Starmer when Keir was going for the leadership. He's now a key strategist, probably the key strategist within the central team. No, and he's got a very interesting backstory. Like he's not a Brit, he's Irish, he's from Cork. So if you go into the Labour Party headquarters, you've got him sitting there with Pat McFadden, is British, but he's pretty Irish, a massive Celtic fan. And sort of came over here and really cut his teeth in politics in Barking, where he was kind of taking on the hard right. And then I think did take on Corbynism with as much vigour as he did in that. So he's tough, he's ascetic, he's hardworking. I'd be a little bit worried if I were him that we're talking about, as the headline was, the McSweeney project. Mm-hmm. I think you've got to be very, very careful. I mean, I fell victim for this, so did others, where as part of trying to undermine the leader, people forget, because Tony Blair won 3 elections and is seen as such a big figure now, the Tories for a lot of the time were trying to say, well, there's nothing to Tony Blair, it's all these kind of shady figures behind him. And I think Morgan's got to be careful that he doesn't get sucked into playing that role. So I think it's always dangerous if Cummings, this was the problem for Johnson with Cummings. People felt that Cummings was the maestro, not Johnson.
Well, Cummings thought that.
Well, Cummings thought that and still does. And when we interviewed Sadiq Khan on Leading, he said if you'd have been in the room with Cummings and Johnson together, you'd have thought Cummings was the Prime Minister. Well, that is never a good look. But that being said, I think I've talked to Morgan McSweeney about Tony's legacy and reputation and so forth, and I think he's got enormous respect for him. One, for having won 3 elections. Morgan is obsessed about winning, and I think that is a very good thing to be if you're in opposition particularly. And I think he's not necessarily saying that Blairism, New Labour, was wrong for then, but I think he is saying that some of the solutions that people like me, people like Tony, that we put forward are sometimes rooted in what we did then, as opposed to a very different politics now. So I think both can be right, because the truth is, to get the sort of majority that I think Labour need, you are going to have to revive that sense of Labour being the party for the working classes and Labour being people who are going to look after the poor, etc., but at the same time be the party of aspiration. And where I worry about Labour's project is that I think they've done a brilliant job as opposition fighters getting themselves to this position where they've gone from Labour can't win to Labour can't lose. That is not unimpressive. What I worry about at the moment is whether the genuine makings of the government project are there. Now, Morgan is not the guy for the building of the government project. He is the guy for winning. And I think that's absolutely right. So, for example, when we were running in 97, I refused to think about government. I was absolutely fixated on the day-to-day battle to get into power. And Jonathan Powell was off working with the civil service and preparing for government. I'm assuming Sue Gray is doing a lot of that. So Morgan's utterly fixated on winning. And you have to hand it to them. They've gone, they're not setting people's hearts on fire necessarily, but they are in this position where, as you say, people like you, most people in politics now think Labour are going to win. So they've done something right. But I think I just wish we could move on from the whole Blair thing. I wish that something new could be properly defined and articulated, and I don't think they're quite there yet.
But do you think the Labour Party is, once again, a class-based party? Is that right? And I mentioned that because I asked Wes Streeting that question, as I did an event with him yesterday. Yeah. He was promoting his book, his memoir.
Which is a pretty good read.
Which is a really good read. Yeah. And, he comes from a very working class background. To which Wes, his answer was yes, the Labour Party is, fundamentally a class-based party. And I was sort of slightly surprised, given that he's sort of seen as the most Blairite figure. I mean, partly that is a consequence of his upbringing, but... I'm not sure about this, because if that were the case, it's like today, for example, Gordon Brown, yet again, is beating the drum for the need to do more on child poverty. He's got a huge piece in The Guardian. I feel that the Labour Party, the current Labour Party, doesn't go on enough about child poverty. I was yesterday in a PRU, a pupil referral unit, where the toughest kids who've been consistently excluded from mainstream schools. And, it was really moving to see the kind of work that the teachers were doing with these kids and to listen to the stories of some of the kids and the real challenges that they faced. And I sort of feel that that sort of child is not part of the current political debate. So yes, they might say that they want to project themselves more towards leave voting working class, but I think that becomes a bit of a caricature. So I actually think that I'm surprised Wes said that, because I don't feel that's what the Labour Party are doing. I would argue that there should be more of a focus on traditional working class than maybe they have been putting over. I still think Keir wants to project himself, rightly from the political perspective, as that kind of left of centre, but that is left and centre. And that's where I think he is, and that's where he's trying to project himself. I think at this point I should say, very good. We should move to a break.
And I should say, let's take a break.
Welcome back to The Rest is Politics with me, David Gauke.
And me, Alastair Campbell. So where should we start? We've both been fascinated by this stuff in Georgia. So, look, Georgia, small country, fewer than 4 million people, so smaller than Scotland. And yet the other day, there was one of the estimates said that the demonstrations outside the Parliament, there were over 250,000 people. So that's what, as a percentage, that's like, 15 million Brits turning out.
It's huge.
It's massive. And basically the thing is over this bill that the Georgian government's trying to bring forward, essentially to say that if you are funded as an NGO or a media organisation with more than 20% of somebody else's money, you're effectively a foreign agent. And of course, the reason that is setting off so many alarm bells is because it's sort of cut and paste from a law in Russia. And the bigger debate, and I, as a sort of, Remainer who's not over it, the sight of these people waving European flags while the water cannons were being turned on them I found very, very, very moving. So what do you make of it?
Yeah, no, complete. And this debate about the foreign agents law, and essentially what's happening is you've got huge crowds outside the parliament in Tbilisi trying to stop the assembly essentially passing this legislation. The president says that she's going to veto it, but that can be overridden. But it's essentially it's a proxy battle about the direction that Georgia is going to go in. On the one hand, you have got what seems to be the overwhelming majority of the public, something like 80-90% of the Georgian population want to join the European Union, which is even higher than the rejoin percentage in the UK.
Even higher
than that. So there's a lot of enthusiasm about, going in the direction of Europe versus Russia. But what you have got is you've got this extraordinary figure, Bidzina Ivanishvili, an oligarch, made his money in Russia, was briefly prime minister. He now has the role of chairman of Georgia Dream, which is the political party
which he effectively founded. He
exactly
bankrolled it, a bit like Tice's bankrolling reform, hopefully less successfully.
Yes.
He bankrolled Georgian Dream.
Quite. And they have essentially been the dominant party for the last 12 years. There are elections coming up in October. And now the previous set of elections, I was talking to a friend of mine who does a lot of work in Georgia, and so there's a huge amount of harassment of opposition MPs and politicians more widely. There's a great deal of concern about what's going to happen in October, and particularly if this law gets passed, does that then provide an opportunity to kind of clamp down on opposition? And there are reports already of, people being beaten up and so on.
I saw a report yesterday of an academic who was showing the bruises and the cuts, and he'd been attacked outside his house by three guys who basically said, stop criticising the law.
It's very authoritarian.
This is Russian stuff, basically. It's Russian style, even if it's not Russian.
Yes, quite. And as you say, you've got this guy, Ivanishvili, who is, he doesn't have an official role, but he appears to appoint everybody. And there's a huge amount of cronyism. So one of his bodyguards became the interior minister. Apparently the maths tutor to his children became the education minister for a period, which sounds like, quite Rory Stewart-ish, doesn't it? But there we go.
So let's drill down on that one. Is Rory Stewart-ish?
Well, if the king appointed Rory Stewart as education minister, I was just thinking,
but the king hasn't done that. The king can't do that.
I know, but
constitutionally, the king is not allowed to appoint ministers. We had a civil war.
That's a very good point. But anyway, a way to advancement is to be a tutor to a powerful person's children.
Yeah.
But Ivanishvili is is pulling all the strings here. And he is much more orientated towards Russia. People are saying his business interests are obviously based in Russia. And you've got this battle. But there's a fascinating sort of generational divide that is going on in Georgia, where younger people see themselves as very pro-European. My friend was telling me that they don't even learn Russian anymore. They learn Georgian and English and French, but Russian speaking is diminishing. It's a much more Western orientated nation, and of course there are parallels with Ukraine in the sense that you've got two parts of Georgia that are already occupied by the Russians in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Has been since 2008. You have got younger people, particularly, who want to look towards the West. You've got this huge process, and of course, that's reminding the Russians of what was going on in 2014, and how essentially a Ukrainian government fell. It
must also be reminding the protesters of, because there's a real risk to what they're doing, because if they get this thing through, and if this harassment of the opponents does step up and continue, then there will be a crackdown on protests. So what they're doing is incredibly brave.
Yes, there's no doubt. And look, there's let's go back to what happened in Maidan Square in Ukraine. 100 protesters ended up being killed. by the pro-Russian Ukrainian regime. That resulted in Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president at the time, fleeing the country, change of government. It's very, very unstable. But, I know you've discussed many times the sort of big elections of this year. But yes, it's a small country, but Georgia in October is going to be fascinating.
It's going to be. Talking of elections, we've just had one in Lithuania, another, as it were, potential hotspot in this kind of spreading Russian story. And so that's been won pretty convincingly. It's got to go to a second round, but the current president, Nausėda, has won. He was short of the 50% that you need. He was pretty close, though. He got 44% of the votes, and the second person was only on 20%. So they've got to go into runoff. He's going to win that. But what was interesting about the debate is just how many all of the candidates essentially were very, very strong in defence, very strong in basically saying this is an election about Russia. In his speech, he said, Zelensky has already said it all. They don't need our declarations of goodwill. They're no use in a fight. They need air defences. Until they have air defences, Ukraine will stay vulnerable. And the polls in Lithuania, Lithuanians essentially believe that they are now vulnerable to an attack from Russia. So there's Georgia, fascinating and ongoing. Lithuania election still to be concluded, but looks like it's going to be won by somebody who's very anti-Russian. And meanwhile, in Russia itself, we've had a pretty significant change of personnel. The defense minister Shoigu, who's been there, I think, for 12 years, and he's been replaced by, I think you've got to be right inside the criminological weeds to kind of read this one properly. But it's a guy called Andrei Belousov, who is not from a military background. He's more an academic and economic background. And he's got no background in the military or in the security services. So I don't know what that says to you. What it says to me is that, this is Putin telling everybody within the infrastructure that none of them are fully safe all of the time, although I see Lavrov is still there, the foreign minister. I suspect he'll be there until he dies. So what do you make of that? And what do you make of what's been going on in terms of, we've got Blinken there today in Ukraine, essentially signalling American support. We talked about John Healey and David Lammy earlier. They've just been to Kyiv as well, signalling that if there is a change of government, Britain will still be with Ukraine. But it feels like things feel militarily like they are moving Putin's way.
They do, I'm afraid. And obviously we've seen the advances near Kharkiv, and and now the city itself is within range of artillery from main, I think it's called tube artillery, from the Russian forces. It also makes it harder for Ukraine to attack logistical points for Russia. So that's moving definitely in the wrong direction. I'm afraid the West did take its eye off the ball here, particularly in the US. Long delay before Ukraine got the sort of $60 billion package of support. And to some extent, Ukraine needs to play for time. But most of the analysis I've seen in terms of the new defense minister, this economist Belousov, is that he's pretty able. Mm-hmm. Yes, he doesn't come from a military background, but this is a sign that Russia is in for the long haul. This is about getting combining the Russian economy with the Russian military even more than it is. I mean, it's on a wartime economy as it is, but this is going to be very attritional. Russia think they can outlast the West, and obviously they are looking at what's going to happen in the US in November, in the hope that if Trump is there, then the opportunities are great. Although it is interesting that Trump, in the end, didn't block the $60 billion package. Mm-hmm. Whether he was somehow talked around, maybe David Cameron did the business. Certainly,
sources close to David Cameron are constantly saying so.
Yeah, well, could well be true. But there's definitely been, there was a shift there. But nonetheless, if you're Ukrainian, you're going to be very worried about the outcome of the US election.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're British, you're pretty worried.
Well, yes.
There's a very interesting piece that we should put in the newsletter from the Wilson Centre, which is an analysis of just how quickly the Russia's war budget has grown. And of course, what's interesting in a dictatorship, you don't have to reveal all the spending that's already been in the system. So they've been growing and growing and growing and growing. But now essentially 10% of their GDP is going on this war. We're talking 30% plus. And it includes things. They've got this fascinating thing where it includes, for example, do you include the tripling of patriotic education costs? This is like right across the government machine now. This is an economy and a budget that is utterly focused on this war. Now we can have our little debates between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak about who's going to be first to 2.5%. But this is a level of commitment and spending that is off the scale. And I don't think the West has yet fully caught up with that.
No, I think that's right. We should also remember, though, that Russia is a relatively small economy.
Yeah.
It's a lot smaller than the UK alone. And if the West really wants to do this, and I think it is absolutely in the West's interest to support Ukraine and ensure that Ukraine ultimately prevails, it needs to do so. And to some extent, it just can't wait around. This isn't about expenditure in the 2030s. And it doesn't, if we're spending money, it doesn't have to be necessarily our own armed forces. It's Ukraine that is on the front line. It's Ukraine that is, trying to contain and ultimately overcome Russia. And, I think there is a very good argument for saying expenditure now in support of Ukraine will mean we will need to spend less on defence in 10 years' time. I do think we should be looking at this as an investment. I come at this as a sort of former Treasury person, very cautious about public spending. But I worry that if ultimately Russia prevails, we will be in a world where we will have to spend 3, 4, 5% of GDP on defence each and every year.
Long time. As we did during the Cold War.
Exactly, as we do. I mean, it can be done.
Yeah.
Whether that can be done and we can spend as much as we do
6-7% a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, if you look at what's happened at public spending over the last 60 years, it's basically defence spending has come down and health spending has gone up. We're not going to be bringing the health spending down, so it's going to be much harder to repeat that sort of level of spending in future. But if we, if however Ukraine can prevail and essentially the Putin regime ultimately defeated and dismantled, then I think it's perfectly possible we might be able to keep spending on defence more than
that was an argument
range.
that was, I felt, missing from the Prime Minister's speech on the security of the world.
Well, sadly, I wasn't asked to contribute.
Otherwise, you'd have said that. Now, let's briefly, before we close, let's just... it's hard to know where to start with Israel-Gaza because it just, I should warn you, David, whatever you say, you get criticised on this subject.
Yeah, I was conscious of that, yeah.
But it's very, very difficult because it's become so polarised. But it was interesting yesterday. So yesterday was Memorial Day in Israel. And that's when the war dead of the past are recognised, but also, obviously, October 7th was foremost in people's minds. And it was interesting, Netanyahu got heckled. The defence minister got heckled. There were people out with posters. And there was this big event at which, and also Ben Gvir and Smotrich, one of their events was kind of, disrupted by protesters saying they weren't doing enough to bring this to an end and to bring the hostages back home. But there was an event, the event with Netanyahu. I just can't. I find it very, very hard to read him right now, because there is clearly a briefing operation going on from the military, from the generals. They essentially are saying, this is all very well, but we don't really know what the strategy is, and so you have this absolute focus at the moment on Rafah, and meanwhile, they're also saying that Hamas are reappearing in the north. So the lack of clarity of a strategy, other than the objective, I get the objective, he's saying they're going to wipe out Hamas and they're never going to return. But in this very studio a few weeks ago, we were talking to John Soares, ex-MI6, and Eliza Manning-Buller, ex-MI5. And John made the point that 60% of Hamas fighters were orphans. And he went on to say an awful lot of future Hamas fighters are being bred right now. And I mean, that has to be part of the argument as to what the consequences of the alienation that people in Gaza are feeling right now, and that body of support that's developing for them around the world. And I just wonder, is Netanyahu so fixed upon, I don't know, his own survival, the politics of the situation, that none of that is really being addressed?
Well, his options are narrowing pretty quickly, as far as I can see, and none of them are good. So, from his perspective, if he wants to keep, if you like, the extremists on board, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and keep his government in place, then he needs to keep hammering away. But as you say, Israel's position, and look, I am instinctively sympathetic to Israel. I think there should be a Jewish state in the Middle East, and I think what happened on the 7th of October was appalling, and any country has to defend itself in those circumstances.
I agree with that.
But what has happened has undoubtedly isolated Israel, damaged its international reputation, and left it running out of allies. And it is dependent upon its allies. And you mentioned the army. I think the army in Israel absolutely recognises that. You are also seeing a shift in public opinion in Israel. Protesters don't necessarily reflect public opinion, but the polling does suggest there is much more support now than there was for a hostages back ceasefire type deal in Israel. That is growing in support, whereas previously there was overwhelming support. No, we've got to remove Hamas. But Netanyahu, can't move in that direction without losing his extremists and then falling. But if he doesn't move in that direction, then Israel ends up being more isolated. And in the long term, strategically, particularly for those of us who are sympathetic to Israel, seeing the damage that is done to Israel's international reputation is really worrying. In the long term, it's going to be sustained over decades. It can't be the villain of the piece as it is seen. Sometimes I think unfairly. There are. It's a really difficult situation, and Hamas absolutely does it. It exploits civilians. It does base itself in civilian areas. It is prepared to put up with a level of suffering of its own people that most other regimes would not do, and it has been explicit that given the opportunity it will repeat October the 7th. So I think Hamas deserves a lot of the blame, but the practical reality is Israel is losing support, has lost. Biden has moved quite a long way, now talking about not providing arms that could be used in Rafah and so on.
So that's the State Department report on the legality of the use of arms that have been given by the Americans. Although if you read between the lines, there was a warning for Israel in there as well. But what you get the feeling with, I've defended Biden's strategy the whole way through as a sense of him being, he is very, very supportive of the state of Israel. He has all his life been supportive of the state of Israel. And he's been expressing that support whilst at the same time, he and Blinken trying to work behind the scenes to get the Israelis to at least to be cognizant of international opinion and where it rests, and to let that sort of affect the strategy in some way. And you do get the feeling with Netanyahu that, frankly, the views of Biden and Blinken are less important to him than the views of Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Now, at some point, there is going to have to be an election.
Yeah.
And, where's that in his thinking? I don't underestimate how unbelievably difficult this is politically for him, for Biden, for Blinken, for the government here, for Keir Starmer, for all world leaders. This is becoming really, really difficult. The politics are very, very difficult. But the reality is that Netanyahu is the one with the most power in this situation. He is not really responding to a lot of the pressure that he's been put under. And that, as you say, long term is, I think, going to create greater problems for whoever follows him.
Yeah, I think there's a divergence between the short-term interests for Netanyahu and the long-term interests of Israel, and that tension, I think, is becoming more and more important as time goes on. And quite how this plays out, I wouldn't want to speculate. But at some point or other, as you say, there is going to be an election, and public opinion is moving against the hard line. Well,
David, it's been a pleasure to have you. We'll report back to Rory that you've done very, very well. Thank you very, very much for standing in for Rory. And we're also going to be we're going to be doing question time as well.
We are.
Because he's still going to be stuck in his cross-legged retreat.
Looking to escape at some point, I hope.
I don't know how he gets back. Thank you and see you soon.
Thank you.